Rob and I spent the day yesterday touring the Delta. He's here from Southern California. I know he will introduce himself and tell you all about who he is, but we've had a wonderful time going up and down the Delta so he could see, as he says, boots on the ground, what's going on here, and get an appreciation. And they're staying at Shannon's house, and both Rob and Steve, and we thank you so much, Shannon, and thank them for coming. And we thank Catherine and her staff for having us here and opening up her restaurant in this area for us to have our meetings here. We are so appreciative, and I believe that we will make progress. Rob, what do you think?
Let's all hope so. Hi, all. Good evening. As Barbara said, I am from Southern California. I'm a real estate broker, a general contractor. My degree's in finance. I am not paid by anyone. My major impetus in terms of getting really interested in water policy was when my son's church camp for water skiing was canceled from lakes and reservoirs down south. And they had to actually reorganize, reschedule, and come up to reservoirs north of the Delta in order to find a reservoir with enough water and enough shade trees to provide a camp environment where the kids could be free to explore their relationship with Jesus Christ. Upon really starting to look at this, I mean, the first thing that anyone's going to come across is the Bay Delta Conservation Program. Main idea, 23, 25, some people call it more or less, doesn't really matter. It's a lot of money for a plan that is, from its inception, upon any realistic research done into the subject, is unrealistic in its expectations. Why are we paying $25 billion for a project that promises no extra water really down south, and also provides the ability for any particular politician to suck extra water from the northern Delta and destroy habitats for the Delta smelt further south for actually the low salinity zone and all organisms involved with that, because that's part of the food chain that feeds the salmon, that feeds the striped bass, that feeds the largemouth, smallmouth bass, the fisheries. These are questions that I have, and I spent, I don't know, the last year and a half researching it. I ran into folks like Steve Haze. I had actually, through a process of collecting day flow data, which is the state repository for all inputs and outputs of Delta inputs and outputs, come to the same conclusion as some of these other folks that you all have seen. Number one, that pumping winter waters from the Delta when we have flows anywhere from 50,000 to 500,000 cubic feet per second going out to sea is a much safer time for the inhabitants of Suisun Bay and for the folks here in northern Delta, rather than pumping water from the Delta when flow rates are small. And they can get as low as, outputs can get as low as 1,000, 2,000 cubic feet a second. During those times, salt water is bleeding into the Delta, and even less than fully treated sewage from Sacramento is providing a toxic chemical mix, which is not good for the North Delta, it's not good for the Central Delta, it's not good for Suisun Bay. It's not good for the fish, it's not good for the farmers. It's bad all the way around. To make a long story short, I made an Excel model of 43 years of day flow data that indicated that by utilizing our existing canals, we can provide a minimum of about 1.2 million extra acre feet per year on average, stretched out over the long term. This can be utilized to refill a new Tulare Lake, such as Steve Haze's design. We would use the Western Delta intakes design as far as at least the location. When asked questions about substituting a overland canal versus the tunnels, as this is I believe, as a general contractor, a viable solution, but there's more work to be done on all those facets. I don't believe that anyone in and of themselves, or even a small group, can come up with all the answers that we need. That's why we're coming together here. And I hope together as a community of Californians and Americans that we can come up with a solution that actually works for all of us. And one last thing before I get into a little video here. I'm not going to play the whole video because most of y'all know the issues that it's talking about, but it's some audio visual aids. Our water policy does not just affect us. A senior atmospheric hydrologist named Dr. James J. Famietti works for JPL right now. For every drop of water that we irrigate that becomes evapotranspirated, it's not just one drop of water that falls in the Colorado Rockies and the Four Corners region through the Panhandle of Oklahoma, Texas. It's more than one drop. Irrigation in the Central Valley actually increases the strength of the North American monsoon water cycle. Water flows over the Sierra Nevada in the months from June through September, joins with the North American monsoon, actually strengthens the flow, like you've probably seen tracking a hurricane, where moist air goes into the core. Very similar process. If you're familiar with the water cycle associated with a rainforest, where trees close to the shoreline evaporate water and it gets carried further and further in, providing more rain. We have this cycle here. It falls in the Rockies. It provides water into the Colorado River, the Rio Grande River, the Arkansas River, the Red River. Provides water for farmers in the Midwest, provides water for ecosystems, for our forests, our national forests in those regions. So make no mistake, the water policy issues that we create and maintain here have an effect on our nation, on our economy. And if we stop producing food, well, we stopped a lot of manufacturing in the United States. Went to China, right? If we stop producing food here in the Central Valley, where's the most likely place it's going to go? Rainforest of South America? Rainforest of Central America? Those are the closest shipping points. I don't see many other viable economic alternatives to those locations to replace the food that we produce here. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and play a little bit of a video for you. We'll have some audio-visual aspects of it that kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about. And I will be able to follow that up because I have the Google Earth information, and I can take you through on as much of a microscopic level as you can get using Google Earth. So with that, I'll go ahead and start the
parties
video.
are too numerous to list, but here's a list of primary.
Can everyone hear that?
An old saying in California water policy is that we have plenty of water for everyone, but not enough for the greedy of a few. Primary issues that affect this are lack of interest from the general public, lack of understanding by the general public and politicians, engineering based on special interest groups. Politicians generally push water plans that reflect the wants and needs of their constituencies. They fail to understand that everything is connected, and we must take a larger, environmentally sound look at how to solve our water problems that reflect the needs of not only California, but our nation and the world. For at least the last 3 decades, California water policy is focused on storing winter and spring runoff from the northern half of the state in the north and conveying it through the delta as needed in the south and mostly during the dry season. This water policy is divisive and failing. Raising the Shasta Dam, the site's reservoir, and the Bay Delta Conservation Plan reflect storage in the north and conveyance through the delta. This water philosophy has failed through the last 30 years by violating the law of diminishing returns and propagating the old political rule of never let a good crisis go to waste. Taken in combination, these concepts reduce the efficiency by which the government can supply water to farmers, urban areas, and the low salinity zone which produces the delta snow. Understanding that the vast majority of California's water issue exists within the Tulare Basin is key to both the problem and solution. The USGS indicates that an annual deficit of at least 600,000 acre-feet per year exists within the Tulare Basin itself. Solving this issue solves most of our water issues in California. The total overdraft of the Tulare Basin is approaching maybe even above 1 million acre-feet. That's a lot of potential storage. Adding a lake and managed aquifer recharge stations in this area is less expensive and more effective at solving our problem. Reestablishing the lake in the Tulare Basin provides both conveyance and storage. We can convey waters to the Kern Canal and or the Kings River, allowing flows to go all the way back to the Bay Delta. This can help in establishing a San Joaquin River restoration program. Understand that for every drop of water that we evapotranspirate out of the Central Valley by irrigating crops, more than 1 drop of water falls as rain in the areas shown in blue, mostly over the Four Corners region and the Panhandle of Oklahoma and Texas. This efficiency is due to the fact that through the creation of thunderstorms, more moisture is drawn in off the Gulf of Mexico into the North American monsoon and falls as rain when it hits the higher altitudes of the Colorado Rockies. These waters feed the Olagala Aquifer, the Colorado River Basin, the Rio Grande River Basin, and the Arkansas, Red River, and multiple other river systems heading off to the east. From the perspective of the United States, for every drop of water we evapotranspirate from the Tulare Basin or Central Valley, this adds 1+ drop of waters to other regions. What about the farmers in this area, in the Midwest? What about the farmers down close to the Gulf of California? And understand that all reservoirs and aquifers associated with the Colorado River are currently depleted. Now, looking at the American aqueduct shown in green, it's easy to tell where the border between America and Mexico is. We simply are not allowing enough water to come through the Gulf of California. Simply put, if we reduce evapotranspiration from the southern half of the Central Valley, we have a lot to answer for both nationally and internationally. Is it our intent to replace crop yields from the Central Valley by cutting and burning rainforests in Central and South America? Is that good for the global environment? Please understand that these are the rational expectations of what would happen if we reduce irrigation in the Central Valley. In order to determine our best path forward, I put together a 43-year study of day flow data, and this is a graph showing existing or old out to sea, shown in green, and existing or old CDP plus SWP pumping from the delta, shown in
I'm going to go ahead and stop it right there because I can go ahead and go through the graphs and stuff much better just using the actual model in the computer. But at this point right now, I would like to open it up. Are there any questions so far as to the material that you've seen?
Tunnels are primarily for water transfers. What do you think about that?
By transfers, you mean transferring water from Northern California to Southern California?
Right.
They are primarily for water transfers. Okay, that's what you have a physical.
It's been going out to sea.
Well, here is the thing. Let me go ahead and answer that by going in. It'll take me a second to load this anyway, so I want to get out the video and look. You can see that these flows here, they go off the chart. And this is, it's at 75,000 cubic feet per second. That's going out to sea. Here's the one thing I wanted you to notice. The yellow line down there, that indicates wet season, wet pumping currently. It goes to practically zero when flows are at their highest. It's because San Luis Reservoir gets filled up. There's no need for irrigation during that time of the year. So we end up wasting the capacity that our forefathers built with their money, with their tax dollars. We have an entirely underutilized asset. Let's at least utilize that asset to what our forefathers built it for. Yeah, you can see right here, we could be pumping, matter of fact, the difference at that one point right there is 15,000 cubic feet per second. Now secondly, in dry years, right here, this is pumping in June 2076, had we done this type of plan, would have been practically nothing. This would have been the out to sea, around 12,500, well, excuse me, around 10,000 cubic feet a second. That's a lot more than the current, or the historic, which would have been less than 5,000, and dropping down to maybe 2,500. When flows drop down to 2,500, the X2 collapses, comes past Sherman Bay, enters into the delta, goes towards where the pumps are currently right now. It doesn't, we're not pumping enough water out to flush things out and keep it clean. It becomes a contaminated environment with salt and sewage. We need to maintain more. I want to go ahead and just look at the long term for just 1 second here. Now this graph shows all the way up to 300,000 cubic acre feet. You can see that we have a number of years that get up into that range about to sea. The green spikes above it indicate the difference. This is the water that I'm looking for. It's that water up there where we can take water out of the environment in an environmentally friendly sort of way, move it down south, and not impact, in fact, benefit the environment within the delta, because we can store it in Tulare Lake. We can join with the San Joaquin Restoration Program and actually pump waters back down into the Bay Area Delta at about 400,000 cubic acre feet, excuse me, 400,000 acre feet per year to help maintain the environment within the delta, within the Suisun Bay. Let's look at this a little bit closer. Look at how far down you got to go to find where the pumping levels are. That's a vast amount of difference. There is a vast amount of water that goes out to sea. There is a vast amount of underutilization of the existing infrastructure. As a general contractor, if the state of California were my client, I would be saying, look, you're looking at doing a remodel here. utilize the assets that you have, utilize the blessings that God has given you, and maximize your return for the dollar that you spend. This includes using pumping during the winter and a new Tulare Lake. A bit of an overview. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the roads. Here, and I'll zoom into each one of these and I'll go over them with you. This is a representation of the Sherman Island intakes. This is a canal, overland canal to the forebay. The dark blue lines coming up here, this represents the Delta Mendota Canal and the California Aqueduct. This would be a new Tulare Lake, which would be connected via and actually I'm informed that there's existing structures that actually do this anyways. They'll pump groundwater up to the Kern Canal, but this would be to pump lake water up to the Kern Canal. So we'll have outlets here and outlets going back to the north. The turnover rate of this lake will be very quick. Well, certainly as quick as the turnover rate for the San Luis Reservoir. Water's going to go in, it's going to go through, it's going to go out. It's going to be going in two different directions. We're going to be returning water. We're probably going to be utilizing about 800,000 acre feet of water to irrigate. Basically, see that blue area? We'll be irrigating that and some a little bit further to the north. But we'll also be returning about 400,000 acre feet back into the delta, meaning that if you remember seeing that graph of the drought here, we're increasing San Joaquin River inputs into the delta during the drought years to maintain an outflow of at least 10,000 cubic feet per second prior to pumping. Now understand what I said there, I meant prior to pumping. There still will be times when actual output drops below. It'll drop down to 7,500 from 10,000. Maybe even a little lower depending on the drought. But it's not going to be 2,500. It's not going to be less than that. That's where we kill fish. That's where we have issues with pollutants and other problems. If one chooses to release more water from Bryant Dam into the San Joaquin, or even into the Kings, this circular type of system, which is actually pioneered by Steve, and he has actually a lot more information on it than I do. Matter of fact, I'm going to get some of it from him here during this trip. We have the ability to circulate this water, to move it around the Central Valley without having some sort of transport system across, conveyance across the valley. You're dependent on the Bryant Dam and its reservoir to feed all of Bakersfield, to feed all of that particular area. And currently the idea is to take that away and use it for the San Joaquin River Restoration Program. Only through a Tulare Lake restoration and getting enough water up there will you be able to maintain a level. And here's where the whole political thing comes in. There are farmers in the Central Valley that have planted long-term water-hungry plants, increasing the amounts that I had shown in that video from maybe 600,000 acre feet to over 1 million. We have to strike a balance with the new groundwater law. We have to be able to balance groundwater. We have to get the local jurisdictions to provide enough enforcement of the groundwater where we're actually regulating crops. Yes, we need more water for the farmers, But yes, we also need the farmers' cooperation in terms of, look, you're gonna have to do some dryland farming. You're gonna have to do some irrigated farming. But we can no longer continue just to overutilize this asset. Just because we give you more doesn't mean that you just have, here's the term I'm looking for. It's called the race to the bottom. In groundwater terms, that means who can dig the deepest well that produces the most water, that sucks the most water out, because they can produce the most water-rich crop. That particular philosophy needs to go away. It needs to be maintained. So I'm seeking a balance between providing more water, providing a historic amount of evapotranspiration that maintains the Colorado River Basin, the Rio Grande, all these other states that if we just cut them off dry, their aquifers are going to go dry. Heck, if you look at Lake Powell, if you look at Lake Mead, they're already quite depleted. Olagala Aquifer, quite depleted. They cannot afford for us to cut off their water. Okay. The two areas in orange here, right here and down here, represent what are called managed aquifer recharge locations. Managed aquifer recharge is an area that basically has large grain substrate, meaning that water penetrates easily and readily in these locations. Now, these are both good locations. This is a overlay from Claudia Font's USGS showing the Cocoran clay and the areas of large grain inclusion. Areas of large grain inclusion are areas that are ripe for managed aquifer recharge, getting water into the deep aquifer. Areas in blue are areas where lakes would form. Just to give you an idea, that's the old Tulare Lake. I'm going to zoom out a little here. See these two little lakes down here? Keep your eye on those. See where they form on the blue areas? Along with Tulare Lake itself. This loop going through here provides access to many of what would be called alluvial fans or large grain inclusions, providing access to the deep aquifer. These will be needed in, let's say, a El Nino year, where we could get as much as, let's say on an average year, we pump 4.5, 4.8 million acre feet of water through these two systems. On an El Nino year, without causing environmental disruption in the delta, we could pump as much as 5 or 6 million acre feet more, basically creating an artificial flood in this area. Fortunately, because of our current dams and other such things, this water is spread out over the year. Much of it can be used just for irrigation during the summer. But we would have a surge where we're going to need to use recharge to get the water into the ground for long-term storage so we can save it for the next drought. It is a combination of adding aquifer recharge during the wet years and reducing pumping that will bring us to a possibility of groundwater management. Make no mistake, a third, as Barbara likes to call it, facet, is a political solution. We cannot just provide more water and have as a real estate broker, I understand that typically in California law, you are entitled to use any groundwater that's under your property. This has been abused for quite some time, and as Steve would attest to, is one of the problems that, and it's part of this race to the bottom thing. If you're a farmer and you own land, you're competing against your neighbor for that limited resource, and you're going out and you're spending that extra dollar to drill your well a little bit deeper, to pump a little more water, so you can put in the more expensive, water-hungry crop and outcompete your neighbor. Hey, I'm a capitalist. I mean, my degree's in finance. That's what I studied in school, business management. That's all well and good up until the point where, well, I'll tell you what, man, it's been conflated with politics. It's been conflated with corruption. These are as large of issues as the engineering required to solve the issue. The engineering is actually pretty simple. Switch philosophy from storage in the north and conveyance during the summer to conveyance in the or extraction during the winter and the wet seasons, and storage in the south. And boy, you're gonna have a lot more efficient system. I join with Steve Haze in his ability to shuffle the water around with Claudia Font and looking at her research in where to put groundwater recharge stations. We can also even flood fields that are fallowed with the farmers' cooperation during extremely wet years, during extremely wet times. January, February, there may be a few fields that are fallow. They work as great groundwater recharge because you already got irrigation systems there for them. And I join with Robert Pike in saying that, hey, he's got a great idea in terms of this Sherman Island thing, in terms of a self-regulating system that if you try and pump too much water during a dry season, before you disrupt the flows in the northern delta or eastern inputs or anywhere else, before any of that happens, you're going to start sucking in salt water through your own intakes. Therefore, it is self-regulating. I mean, to me, that's pretty good. I'd rather have that than have a politician with his hand on the trigger of a Bay Delta conservation plan. And it's like, oh wait, my buddy down here in Southern California needs more water, so we're going to go ahead and pump more through the BDCP at this point and cut off the flows going to the Delta, to the smelt, to the farmers within the Delta. That's not my plan. That's not my idea. That's not my concept. It's not Robert's concept. Okay, it's not Steve's concept. The one warning, the one thing that I am afraid of, and I'm truly afraid of this, is proliferation of extra pumping in the south just because there's more water there. I want to maintain an evapotranspiration rate that is close to what Phoenix, Vegas, Colorado River, Rio Grande, all those other, what they've come to experience over the last 40 or 50 years. I think that should be maintained at about what its level was maybe at the year 2000. We should increase pumping in order to do that. Other than that, we have to make an agreement with all of these jurisdictions that are charged with the local groundwater legislation and the enforcement thereof to limit farmers and what type of crops that they can use, so that we can balance the whole situation. But it is multifaceted, and I hope to join with this team of larger folks here. My ideas may not be the best, there may be more, but we need to be looking at these, and each of us need to contribute, and we need to start bringing in our local churches, bringing in all the interest groups that we can, and let them know that currently our politicians and the bureaucrats and the water brokers and all these other folks have been generating, propagating, soliciting a false narrative for decades. They've raised an entire generation of kids on it in school. A lot of this is in order for a typical political game where you elect me and I'm going to take care of your interests. We're all familiar with that. I've seen it in your eyes. I've seen heard the frustration in your voices. I've been here on the ground. I've seen what's going on. It really saddens me that it's come to the point where most of us don't trust our government. But when we see them doing such things that, political payoff. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to any questions. I'm sure there are about a couple of hundred, and I'll leave it at that. Go ahead.
But the real truth of the matter is, my wife and I watch problems every day. There's a bunch of water going by our house, millions and millions of gallons that aren't being captured, not upstream, not in the middle of the stream, and not in the delta, and it's going out into the ocean. And that's where it needs to get captured, not down below. You see, it won't even get there. That water should be already going down to the maximum that it can already. But the problem is, you're not getting it out when you should get it out before it goes out into the bay. And I'm telling you, I saw the rainfall, we're not getting the snowfall, and I know we're going to get from the DWR, well, we didn't get the snow melt, we didn't get the snowfall, and so now we're going to put those barriers in.
Yeah.
So, but I will tell you this, that I watch it go by and I go, why? Why is this going by and not being captured? That's where the money should be put. The money should be put into capturing the water before it gets past the delta. Thank you.
The point of Dr. Pike's program, now, Dr. Pike has actually looked at capturing as much as 30,000 cubic feet per second. Anymore, all right, we only have the capacity in the canals for 15,000 cubic feet per second right now. They originally designed the California aqueduct at 13,000 cubic feet per second and the Delta Mendota at 4,500. That adds up to 1,750. 17,500. Where'd the other 2,500 go? Well, Lamson Sidens is one. And actually, I'm hoping from a couple of my fellows here that we could possibly get information as to where the actual problems with the delta flows, or not the delta, but the canal flows are. Because really and I don't have the graph up anymore, but if you see those large areas of outflow, what our friend back here was talking about, where there's just boatloads of water going by. That's why we're moving, or looking to move, the delta intakes down to Sherman Island, because that is the point of concentration right before it enters into Sassoon Bay. Every drop of water that goes into the delta has to flow by that location in order to get into Sassoon Bay. At that point, we can create large enough screens or other mechanisms to collect water that we can collect. We can really collect more than 15,000 cubic feet per second. In order to obey the laws, we will have to create enough square feet. I think it's basically approach speeds. In other words, if my fingers are a screen, the water coming through from delta waters into a reserve, I think it has to be about 0.1 feet per second. And we're talking inches per second. That's like moving in slow motion. And this is primarily so smaller fish won't get trapped up against the nets. Engineering the solution to that is as simple as just figuring out the ratio between square footage of netting and how much water you want to take out. A difficulty in, all right, number one, the courts have ruled politics and laws are one thing. Going up against a judge's ruling and others, I mean, that's actually more difficult, more time consuming, harder to overturn. I mean, are we gonna ever overturn Roe v. Wade? That's difficult. Judges have ruled that instead of using an actual physical barrier to keep salt water out to sea, that a virtual barrier be put in place, which is basically maintaining a flow out to sea to keep the salt water back. Unfortunately, even that law has basically been violated by California water policy because they want to store water in the north and pump during the summer. So yes, I understand your frustration. I feel it. I see it. Okay, it's on screen right now. See those blue lines and green lines that are extending way above the page? Let me go ahead and move this up a little bit here. Okay? That's what he's talking about. Huge amounts of water going out to sea. Now, unfortunately, we cannot capture all that. Even things like eastern inputs. Now, eastern inputs are from all those rivers that are to the east of the delta that feed it. It does include the San Joaquin. Other inputs include the Sacramento, which is approximately 70% of it. It's kind of divided on the day flow, the Sacramento and the Yolo bypass, but much of the Yolo bypass comes from the Sacramento River anyway. So, capturing all that water is difficult. Go ahead.
The average flow of the Sacramento River is 15,000 cubic feet per second. The State Water Board says that water must flow past Chips Island at 11,400 feet per second to keep salinity out of the delta. So you're going to need water to go out to sea. That's what I'm saying. That much.
Absolutely. Actually, the model is showing 10,000 cubic feet per second. And it sustains, here's the issue. When they say it's 11,000 cubic feet per second or 11,500, what they're looking at is a situation whereby you start from a drier solution and try and push it out. We just had a burst. We just had a storm here in December. If you start from the starting point of you've already flushed out a lot of water to sea, and then you maintain 10,000 cubic feet a second, you can certainly maintain an X2 level of approximately 70 miles, or excuse me, 70 kilometers. That's, now I don't know where Chips Island is specifically, but
Antioch.
oh yeah, we can keep it past Antioch, no problem. That's like 90 miles or 90 kilometers from the Golden Gate. By the way, guys, just so you know, X2 is the measurement of 2 parts per thousand measured a meter off the bottom, basically along the shipping channel from the Golden Gate Bridge all the way up into the Delta. Let's go ahead and look at that real quick. Basically, if you start off with a flood event like we just had, or at least a good outflow, and then you maintain 10,000 cubic feet a second, you should be able to keep it probably, certainly, it would be in the 75 to 80 kilometer range. There are different methodologies, there's different ways of looking at it. I believe this one to be valid, but I also believe that they're looking at it from starting at a relatively dry, what do you need to push it out past Antioch. Prior to 1849, when we had the gold rush, where everyone is using the hydrologic mining techniques, you know, squirting a big old hose at the hillside and washing all the sediment into it. The San Francisco Bay was a third larger. Actually, if you look at Suisun Bay and San Pablo Bay, Suisun Bay is the one over here, San Pablo, the one over there. They were twice as big. The entrance to Carquinez Strait being right here. Understand, San Pablo Bay went all the way up into this area. When the tide comes in, the energy of the tide would have gone back to the back of the bay. Now it's all flushed down over this way. If we really want to go ahead, if controlling the salinity is really a mandate for our government, etc., we not only have to look at how much water we flush out, but look how much salt water we flush in. In terms of the carbon cycle, EPA regulates how much CO2 is emitted from your tailpipe and any smokestack around the world. Why don't they regulate how much salt is getting pumped in to Suisun Bay, changing the saltwater content within there? It is as much of a pollutant as CO2 emissions are. To the Delta smelt, it's more so. San Pablo Bay is emitting more salt water at a much higher rate relative to anything else than, you know, equivalent comparisons to CO2. Basically, it's kind of like as many smokestacks as there are in China. The Delta smelt are living in a saltwater environment where San Pablo Bay is China, just full blown, just pumping it out. Now, I didn't really even want to talk about this, but because this is getting out into the weeds a little bit for me. These lines are just kind of a concept that I had of removing a portion of what are basically duck runs, basically the back reflective wall of San Pablo Bay. Installing some different, right now they have a barrier there that actually captures energy. They have optimized San Pablo Bay to focus as much tidal energy as possible into San Pablo Bay and up into the Delta. They've designed it that way. It'd be easy to throw a wrench in the works by redesigning some of that structure, creating basically what's called the tidal bore by capturing some of the energy and deflecting it back up into this area. You can create an actual wave node, a mound of water out in the middle of San Pablo Bay that coincides with high tide. Haven't got it all the way there yet. It's something that is just it was in the back of my mind. I really didn't think I'd be talking about it, but the gentleman asked the question. We need to look at also, as much as we need to look at and work at increasing water flows out of the Delta, my plan calls for 10,000 cubic feet a second prior to pumping one drop. We need to look at ways of mitigating how much salt is pushed in to Suisun Bay as well. Yes, ma'am. Hold on. Come on over here. Come on.
Do you think the shortage of water is due to the global warming, like the CO2 that is brought into the atmosphere and then kept there from as many people that live on the earth, and how many trees are getting cut down for paper, so we're not able to get rid of the carbon dioxide? Do you think that since the carbon dioxide stays there and the sun gives us heat rays that stay in because of the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere stayed there because we have so much, do you think that that's why water is mostly going into the atmosphere and staying there because of the heat and not capable of coming back down as rain. Is that maybe an idea?
I understand your question, and that's a very good question. The atmosphere, yes, causes global warming, yes. There are, some people say yes, some people say no, causes climate change. Here's the thing. If the atmosphere generally warms, yes, more evapotranspiration will, or more evaporation will occur over oceans, generally. However, let's say in the Gulf of Alaska, northern Pacific, there is a salinity cycle by which cold air blowing over ocean water evaporates air, which creates much of the winter storms that come over here and soak Seattle, Northern California, etc. It's cold air that actually causes the evaporation. That extra saline water sinks down, joins into a current which sinks down along the bottom of the ocean. Rich, do you know what the name of that current is? The one that drops down into the salinity?
The one that came way low this year, right?
Well, it's the same one that causes currents like the California current. It's this. Pardon me? No. I'm talking about basically when you evaporate water from salty water, you create more saline water. That saline cold water becomes denser and actually sinks down to the bottom of the ocean, displacing waters that are currently there, creating a current going back in another direction. This is the same type of ocean current that is responsible for maintaining heat distribution throughout the entire Earth, and it's basically the basis for the reason why we have currents such as the California current, such as, what's the one, the Gulf Stream, the one off the coast of Florida. These currents actually redistribute heat, and it's those evaporated waters that form our Pacific storms. We don't have control over them. We have zero. What we do have control over is how much evapotranspiration occurs in the Central Valley. Our winter storms are fairly random. Global warming, CO2 in the atmosphere, what that may well have effect on, what it affects right here, is we may have less snowpack, we may have more rain, meaning that instead of having that typical spring type surge, that surge may occur a couple months earlier. It may the mountains may get more rain, less snow, meaning that those floods come a little earlier. It's a contingency that we should plan for. This plan actually takes care of that. It would allow you to pump those waters anytime they come. Where did the young lady go?
In the kitchen to wash dishes.
Oh, okay. Well, I wanted to check and see if that answered it. Yes. Global warming. All right, hey, we're 2/3 covered with water. If the temperature actually rises, we're probably going to see more atmospheric water. More atmospheric water typically will mean no more rain, but who knows where it's going to be. You may have places of greater dryness. You may have places where it rains like gangbusters. I don't know how that's going to affect our local area. There's a lot of different opinions on it. They say the science is totally resolved. All right, yeah, it may be totally resolved in the fact of, yeah, you might see, there's so many, there's so much stuff. I mean, it could be orbital, it could be, yes, go ahead.
That current you're talking about, the Polar Express.
No, it's not the polar, it's a, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name of it, but it is basically a current whereby surface waters are subducted, they're brought into more tropical regions, they come up, they produce great upwellings of very cold, nutrient-rich water, which produce some of the greatest fisheries in our world. Thermohaline current, there you go. Thermohaline, meaning thermo meaning heat, haline meaning salt. It's a combination of those two factors that drive this big ocean current. I was really not expecting questions on that. I just pulled that one out of my, yes ma'am.
I think where she was going with it, at least the question is that the kids are realizing now that as we change areas that have large CO2 production to thoroughly just being agricultural or homes, that we have what we saw in Oklahoma with the Dust Bowl effect. That sometimes when you change the normal CO2 levels in a region, you attract less water. If you attract less water and it has a more displaced time frame when it comes down, i.e. your big floods in December as opposed to being in a snowpack because of a lower temperature when it's retained, that you've lost your balance of distribution of water coming through a river over the course of the 365 under a normal pattern that was usually used to make projections back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s for our storage. So what the kids are wondering is, because we change what's occurring from the ground and it attracts moisture differently, are we paying attention to that as much as we should?
Yeah, I am not aware that CO2 is not really one of those particles under which raindrops form to and get sucked
But
down.
isn't the chlorophyll production of plants that is necessary to provide something within the removal of the CO2 to, I mean, desert areas don't attract rain.
Correct.
Land that has trees, growth, et cetera, does. So as simple as I can make it, but that's
And if you
as
talk
quick as
to-
I can make it, is that we become very agricultural. We have a lot less growing per acre as far as things that do the process, thus it attracts less water, and our weather patterns seem to change substantially in largely agriculturally rich communities.
And this is one of the questions, you know, I think we talked with Steve on it a little bit. And actually on the disc that I'm handing out, there's, I don't know, it's a 279 paper from the, page paper from the USGS. There is a, I think it's around page 35 or something, a paper which shows the areas in California where the most evapotranspiration occurs. One of those areas is the Tulare Lake region. Putting it under a lake would actually reduce the amount the evapotranspiration that's occurring there. Keeping a lake there that actually moves water through it quite rapidly, not allowing it to heat too quickly, would be a bit more productive in what our goals are in terms of trying to limit just evaporation. To me, evaporation all by itself is a waste. When you want to maximize evapotranspiration, limit evaporation, and produce as much food as you can. When a plant transpires water, it's taking in carbon atoms from the atmosphere. It's utilizing the hydrogen and oxygen molecule. It's producing complex carbon molecules through photosynthesis, and it's kicking out oxygen and water vapor. As far as any relationship between production of CO2 in a local region, limiting rainfall in that local region, I have not seen a study on it. And I haven't, you know, for instance, in China right now, where they're pumping out CO2 like gangbusters, is that affecting the Indian monsoon? The Indian monsoon just had a pretty record season.
But did it normally not have such monsoon moments and more spread out where it exacerbates?
Steve, have you seen, you're pretty globally wise on things like that. Have you seen any studies on anything like that?
Well, I have, as it relates to, there are studies that are currently, that have been conducted dealing with, to say, the global effects of industrial growth in China, the amount of CO2 that's emitted, and following the jet stream, as well as mercury and other elements, contaminants, and they actually are dropping into our alpine lakes in the high Sierras. So there is a global impact or effect due to industrialization in China. But as far as I have heard to some extent that maybe the reason why we're seeing these larger weather events in the western Pacific is also because of what is occurring as far as industrialization in China.
So that means all fines and all restrictions.
This is one of the things that I'll get to you in just a second. This gets to one point that I have. All right, if we can't solve the problem here and produce our food here and do it in an environmentally sensitive way here, are we going to export our farming like we did our production, send it over to South America or wherever it goes? Because that's what globalization has done. If demand for food is not going down. If we reduce supply here, it's going to crop up somewhere else. Are we going to burn down rainforests to do it? Are we going to leave it to another country that is going to pursue production methodologies as poor as those in China with as little regard for CO2 emissions as in China? Are we going to let that happen to our farming? That's one of my concerns. That's why I'm here, along with the environment. But it's like, hey guys, if we reduce food production, food prices go up a little bit. If food prices go up a little bit, you're going to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more kids dying of malnutrition globally. You're going to have certainly a lot more kids in India or Southeast Asia being sold into slavery because their families can no longer afford to put food on the table for 5 mouths, but they can afford 4. So sister number 2 has to go. Can you imagine making that decision as a parent? That breaks my heart.
The sad thing is where they go.
And where they go and what they're made to do. That breaks my heart. Yes, sir. What was?
I want to say just a word about the man's impact on the carbon dioxide emissions, and that's the other side of this equation. You know, Sacramento has more than 1 million trees there that were all planted by mankind. We have lawns, we have shrubs besides that are all, the whole time the sun's out, they're taking in carbon dioxide because that's what they do, and they're growing. And they call it carbon sequestration now, but that's what they've always done. So the other half of that equation is almost never mentioned, except in terms of carbon sequestration, which is supposed to be a good thing, but we've always been doing that. So if we talk about man's impact on our carbon dioxide emissions, we also have to talk about the other side of the equation, about all the things we planted, including farmland, including crops, because they do that as well. There are some equations that I've Googled once upon a time that talks about how many acres it takes to absorb the amount of carbon dioxide that comes out of one vehicle per year, and it's a couple of acres of trees or something. But anyway, there's 2 sides to that equation, and I just wanted to point that out.
That's not all. We've been fighting forest fires for a relatively short time. In the old days, they used to just let it burn because they didn't have the equipment or the ability to put out forest fires. Imagine how much one forest fire put out. It far exceeds anything man is doing now. I think that we control more than we create. So I think it's ridiculous.
Look up the paper by Dr. Famiglietti, which is irrigation of California's Central Valley increases southwestern water cycle, because it speaks to watering the forest. It speaks to forest fires. When we evapotranspirate water, growing food in the Central Valley, that water is recycled. That's why they call it the water cycle. It flows over the Sierra Nevada. I'll get with you in a second, Steve. Flows over the Sierra Nevada. joins with the North American monsoon, falls over the Four Corners region. You know how many national forests are in the Four Corners region? Forests of Colorado, those aspen forests, all that huge area, northern Nevada, northern Arizona, all sorts of national forests. And they're the headwaters of rivers that flow down into farmlands that again reuse that same water molecule. And if you take out the irrigation here, what's going to happen is a little bit more often you're going to have more drought. You're going to have more bark beetles. You're going to have more forest fires. You're going to have more trees dying. Okay, so the gentleman's got a very valid point. Thank you, sir. Steve.
On a global basis or macro basis, and with that same study, if you're talking about the Colorado River Basin, and you're talking about the Central Valley and the evapotranspiration and that water being utilized in that Great Basin, the problem is you have to look at it in the context of the water budget. And the same research is talking about the dewatering of the Colorado River Basin. So I think it's really important to put this all in the context is that we can come up with solutions, and they can be technical solutions or they can be based on how to be much more effective or efficient, but the incremental benefit that's derived will not offset the total loss. So if we look at groundwater depletion, which took hundreds of thousands of years to accumulate vast amounts of water in the Central Valley, and if you're pumping out 10 million acre feet in the San Joaquin Valley, and it's estimated that a recharge of 1.5 million acre feet, where's the rest of the water coming from? It's not coming from precipitation because it is, you know, they have maps that talk about evapotranspiration zones. That's one of the higher zones. Death Valley is a good example as well. I mean, that's zone 17. These are 13, 14, 15. It means that you're putting water on the ground, you're in the root zone. Some of it may work its way back down, but if it takes 3 acre feet of water for 1 acre of almonds, and you're not even getting but 10 inches of rain, which is less than a foot, so less than 1 foot per acre, you're at a net loss. And if you're looking at high acreage, right now, and that's the challenge, is that we're facing is the fact that we are at millions of acres of irrigated lands with a certain expectation that there's a large amount of water available. These solutions are incremental, and the question is whether or not we're going to start to make the necessary decisions that are fair and equitable up and down the Central Valley. The thing that's interesting is Rob is from Southern California, and he's here giving a presentation on how he can help this region of the Central Valley, which is very commendable. Unfortunately, yesterday evening, I'll give you an example. There's an individual with the city of Fresno. He's going to go to Vallejo, and his perspective was the best thing that can happen is that there's an earthquake and a flood in the Central Valley. Nothing about people living here, nothing about the economy, nothing about the way of life. And that's the problem that we're dealing with, and Rob alluded to it as well, is that there are greater interests, greater powers that do not look at how to respect everybody's way of life. It does mean sharing and making I hate to use the word sacrifices, but the greatest generation of this country made extraordinary sacrifices when they were asked to. And we're not talking about making extraordinary sacrifices. What we're talking about is people like Rob has done, come up all the way from Southern California and said, I'm against those tunnels. I don't want water transferred south of the Delta if it's going to impair the Delta. But, you know, when you talk about saltwater intrusion, that's another challenge. You don't want brackish or salt water to intrude into the Delta.
Sorry, did I mess it up?
because it will affect agriculture in the long term. I mean, it goes on in that respect, but the bottom line is, the bookend is, it doesn't matter how much research, how many more reports. He showed 65 million acre feet over so many years. We're at 10 million acre feet of extraction in the San Joaquin Valley, and by that is not sustainable. So it's really a call to action in that respect. So I just want to say, Rob, thank you for coming to share your concepts, your ideas, and I think putting those on the table and working with people here in the Delta is the most important. If there's a place I would stand, no matter where I live in California, is right here in the Delta, because this is really indicative of the future of California. If we can't take care of the Delta and the people and the agriculture, the economy here, and the environment, then California loses overall. It's more important to protect the Delta, in my humble opinion, and the people of Clarksburg, Walnut Grove, Isleton, you name it, than to have the water sent south to have another high-rise in LA, to be honest with you. I think this is more important.
Any other questions tonight? Kim has a question over here.
have a question. I really want to just say, yeah. Since you were bringing up the Colorado River Basin, I saw a film recently called Remains of a River, and it talked about it was a story of two gentlemen who took the trip from the headwaters of the Colorado River all the way down to Mexico, and showed how this is a fascinating film, and I think everybody here should watch it, because you will see what diversion does to a river, and what will happen here if the tunnels are built. But what I wanted to make a comment, and I haven't checked the facts out, but at one point they were talking about diverting water. This is even before it becomes the Colorado River. It was, I think it's called the Green River, but of diverting water over into Denver area, and it was making the comment that 50% or so of that water was going to be used for landscaping. And if you think of destroying a river so that people can have landscaping or et cetera, whatever it is, and in this case we know what it is. It's going to be building more homes down in Southern California. It's going to be supporting more crops that are really not appropriate for the Central Valley or whatever. But anyway, it was very, very interesting to really hear that be talked about. And also the other thing is to realize that this is happening all over the country here as well as all over the world. And people need to really, I think it's very important to pay attention to how it's happening other places, and I think it can also maybe help us to get some perspective in terms of maybe what other people are doing, etc. So anyway, I was just kind of shocked. But Remains of a River, and you can see it online, and it's very, very interesting film.
It says that it's linked on YouTube as well.
I remember hearing somewhere in school or something about that. When the conquistadors first sailed up the Gulf of California, they complained about sailing upriver. The flows from the Colorado River were so strong that they were actually causing flows out the Gulf of California. It'd be kind of like sailing up through Sassoon Bay when there's a big old spring flood coming out and flows are coming out at 100, 200,000. If you're trying to do that in a sailboat, it might be a little bit of work, As far, I had actually looked at that exact plan that you're talking about, diverting, and basically there is a particular lake over there where you raise the elevation a couple hundred feet, and you can actually get it to flow kind of over into the Colorado River Basin and flow downhill. I believe that's, I'm not sure if that's even the Arkansas River. It might be just slightly north of that, but it flows all the way back around and joins into the Mississippi. You could replace those waters a little further downhill, downstream, by diverting water from the Great Lakes region. And you're not talking about aqueducts much larger than the California aqueduct. But you know what? That's something I think for a big time future discussion by our grandchildren. Okay, those are not issues that I don't think that we're qualified to deal with. I think what we should just remain focused on is preventing catastrophes here. Preventing catastrophes. Oh, by the way, you had talked about national and or global. Yes, the Olagala Aquifer is depleted. Yes, we got all sorts of reservoirs depleted. Groundwater in India, groundwater in the Middle East, groundwater in China are all overdrafted. We do face a very real prospect of a possible, here's the way I see it. Anytime the groundwater is short in any particular region, if that region has a drought, food production is going to go down. If that hits the Middle East, if that hits India, if that hits China, we're talking about a number of people dying from starvation. If we can achieve big strides in things like desalinization, which has been brought up here, and I applaud it, if we can actually achieve those, I sincerely know that that would be a fantastic, matter of fact, there was a quote from President John F. Kennedy that if mankind could achieve desalinization on a large and inexpensive scale, something to this effect, paraphrasing here, that would indeed be one of the great scientific achievements of all time. I agree with that. Problem is up to this point, it's been expensive. You couldn't produce enough to really get what you needed. But I'm very interested in hearing on anything and everything about that.
Justice plan.
Yes, I know. Short on it. I know that our friend Steve just came back recently from the Middle East. They got problems there. They had to put a refugee camp basically on top of an aquifer, one of the most productive aquifers in a particular region. If you put a refugee camp because of, let's say, ISIS or other turmoil in the Middle East on top of an aquifer, and you don't provide proper sanitation facilities, where's it gonna go? Gravity sucks, doesn't it? So, anyways, I think unless there are any other questions, I thank you all very much for coming and the very kind reception. Love your town. Americana, all the way. Thank you very much.
Steve, and all of you for coming tonight. Anna said she had to leave early. She regrets having to leave, but she couldn't give up her exercise tonight. Next Thursday, she will exercise in the morning, but she's dedicated to losing some weight and staying on this program. It's her New Year's resolution. So thank you all. This is really good. It was fabulous information. It's going to take many different pieces, concepts of desalinization, the problems with polluting our water, and other things we've already identified to be all put together to come forward with North Delta Cares and giving a portfolio of ideas to our politicians and people that will listen. So that's what we're working on, and we thank you very much. And have a good night. Drive carefully.